Lonnie has been part of my life. What? When did you take over at ADL? 15 years ago?
Yeah, 2005.
I was in the middle of a business deal that my president was negotiating, and Lonnie came to my office to as a courtesy call. And I thought, who needs this? But I will be,
Nice.
be a good guy because I'd always supported anti-defamation league. I think an hour and a half later, I figured the hell with the business deal. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
You know, this man is interesting. And the role that Lonnie has played in my life over the years is similar to what Jack does medically. It's a translator of what the hell is going on. How do I put this in context? What's important? Please pull out the important pieces from all the noise. And he's really kept me sane. So there's Mara. I was thrilled when we were talking about this and that recently, and I figured, what the hell? Lonnie, would you be willing to speak to my group? And he said, yes, and what you're going to hear will be fascinating and much needed at this point in our lives.
Good.
You're on.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. And as Barbara was saying nice things about me, which I always appreciate, I also refer to Barbara as somebody who's just an integral part of my life since I met her that day in 2005. I was a young attorney who decided to take a career path and begin my process of doing public service work and working for the ADL. And everyone said, you gotta know Barbara Kiffer. She's been a part of our history of this organization for so long. And I went in and I just was kind of sheepish, didn't really know much about her except for the few things my staff had prepared. And then I realized, wow, what a powerhouse and what an amazing person and intellect and heart and all the rest. And so we've had this connection now for 15 years. And even though I left ADL 2 years ago and then took on the new presidency of the Jewish United Front here in Chicago, my connection to Barbara will never ever change. It will always be strong. And whenever she asks me to do something, I always say, just tell me when. So this is one of those examples. So I'm happy to do this. It looks already that this is a very engaging group, not shy, willing to talk about issues of the day. And God knows there's so many issues to talk about. So Barbara and I talked about what would be kind of interesting. And, my career has been kind of interesting in terms of I was a prosecutor. I went to work and ran a state agency for child support enforcement to help mothers get child support from delinquent dads. And I moved on to ADL for 14 years, where I really dug into extremism, hate crimes, prejudice. And now I'm running the second biggest social service and human service organization in the state. So I've had this really interesting career, always with the eye of, quite frankly, helping those most vulnerable. And I love that. And so we thought that maybe the thing would be most interesting right now is talk a little bit about just the rise of anti-Semitism, hate in this country, a little bit of the why. And whenever I talk to people about, what's the latest, I also like to talk about, all right, what can we do? Because there's a lot here that I think with good people, with good connections and a voice and a bully pulpit, we can actually push back on some of these disturbing things I'm about to talk about. So she said, that sounds great. Go for it. So I said, okay. So I jotted down a couple of my, yesterday I had some time to just think about what I want to talk with you about. So I'll start a little bit with the good news and the bad news, right? And yeah. Did you need something from me or no? You're just saying hello. Okay, got it. Okay. So, I always, when I do good news, bad news, I'd like to start with the bad news and then get into the good. So let's talk about the bad news. There's absolutely been a significant uptick in hate crimes, especially in the last 4 to 6 years. Even before Trump, there was an uptick and then we saw an explosion. And hate crimes are basically tracked by the FBI. These aren't things that are made up and they're not fake news. These are legitimate statistics that all major law enforcement agencies report into one big portal. It comes out. You can see it online if you'd like. And so you get a sense of where they at. And they break it down by classes, groups, religion, race. You get a sense of where the most victims are, et cetera, et cetera. And we are seeing a significant uptick in certain classes in particular. Uh, Jewish community, for example, an uptick that we haven't seen in many years, like really disturbing numbers going up. An uptick in terms of on racial constructs, in terms of animus against Black people or people of color. So those are two really disturbing trends. Thankfully, there hasn't been huge upticks in the Muslim community. LGBT has seen steady upticks, but nothing that drastic. But in terms of two groups that really have seen an uptick, it is the Black community and the Jewish community. And there's the why. Why do we see this uptick in hate crimes and hate attitudes and all the rest? And I think there's several reasons to unpack here. One, more than ever, we were talking just a couple of minutes ago about, was the defense playing to the base, the Trump America, et cetera. Quite frankly, I don't think many people that are behind Trump are even watching the impeachment, to be honest with you. I think it's just something they just move on for and don't have much attention for. But nevertheless, but there are no doubt a wide swath of Americans who are feeling detached from society, even more than in some of our lifetimes, in the sense that this country has kind of passed them by in terms of growing up in a certain milieu, a certain area of the country where your grandparents and your parents took on certain professions that you were just kind of destined to take on, and all of a sudden those jobs aren't there, whether it be technology, whether it be by other labor that can take care of it without you in another part of the world. So that growing disaffectedness, this feeling that you're not a part of something, leads to anger, leads to resentment, leads to stereotypes, and leads to the exact type of invective that we saw January 6th. So there's this feeling of not being connected. What made Make America Great Again so compelling to so many people was, I want to go back to a time that I remember where my life, my parents' life, my grandparents' life was actually okay, and now it's not. That's what was so compelling for so many people with in terms of that particular Make America Great Again. It was, let's get back to the way things were. And the way things were, it was a less diverse society. It was much more hierarchical. It was much more white. That's what that really was. And Trump tapped into that beautifully. And I don't use beautifully in terms of a positive, but in terms of strategically, it was the right sweet spot to really get those types of people that were feeling that detachment from life. Two, talked about it a couple minutes ago too, the proliferation of social media, of this ability for people to get sucked into dangerous sites, dangerous apps, dangerous places that don't allow them to see anything other than this small little area. As a result, they get kind of brainwashed, they get taken into the narrative, and as a result, they can't really see outside of this narrow way of looking at life. And that goes for left and right. It's not just right. It's the way our society has now been, is that you choose to go. And all of these high-tech companies know exactly what you are leaning towards, and they continue to pump you with that information. So there's the sense that powers higher than us have kind of taken us into these separate roles, and that leads to further polarization. And if you go down some of these really tough rabbit holes, like these websites that I used to monitor when I was at Anti-Defamation League, these are places that talk about real hate and what you can do to take matters into your own hands. It's the Charlottesville, it's the January 6th, it's the Poway, it's the Tree of Life Synagogue, it's the Pulse nightclub. These are places. What does every single one of those incidents have in common? They were all planned on social media, whether it be 8chan or different parts of Reddit. They all coalesced on social media. That Pittsburgh shooter that went into the temple, it was all through a site that he was on, that he got brainwashed in, and he took out his hate in ways that were so destructive. Third piece, the polarization of America. I mean, there's no question that just the state of our politics has gotten to a point where it's just untenable. Look at what's happened in the last couple of weeks, months, etc. And when people have the bully pulpit, whether it be a senator, a congressman, or a president, and there isn't a direct condemnation of hate, it emboldens these people in ways that we had never seen before. And that's just not even being political. The ability for them to feel emboldened. You go back to Charlottesville, and words have ramifications. And when there were good people on both sides, I was at ADL at the time, and we saw the uptick of positivity when that line was mentioned. Good people on both sides, it was as if it was their Christmas. This was validation for them. This was them feeling emboldened. And then you saw at that debate where he said, basically, stand back and stand down. You can be sure that thousands of them felt like, again, they have someone in their corner, they feel emboldened, and they can take out this stuff in ways that were really destructive. So, and again, it's not just the president, it's senators, and it works on both sides. And so when you have these different people that are encouraging and emboldening these haters to do bad things are inevitably going to happen. And that's what we saw, of course, on January 6th. I said I would mention something good. The good is this. I don't think, I really don't, and again, this is just me talking right now, but I've studied this and I've been a part of it for so long. I don't think there are now 30, 40, 50 million more haters in the United States than there were 8 years ago. I really don't believe that. I believe this country for a long time has always had between 10 and 15% of our country, unfortunately, Americans, we talk about human nature, that have just despicable, awful hatred in their hearts that they just can't relieve themselves of. So then you talk about 10 to 12% of those people. The difference is those 10 to 12 people 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago were very much marginalized. They were on the sides of society. They didn't feel they had a voice. And for all the reasons I just discussed earlier, those people now feel like they in fact do. So I really don't believe that whether it be Trump supporters, Republican supporters, Democratic supporters, whatever it may be, I don't believe our country is now infested with 50 more million people that hate Jews and blacks and Latinos and Muslims and Indians. I don't believe that. I think at our core, we actually are a country of acceptance, not just tolerance. I think that is what makes America great. Not a great again, but makes America great. I am convinced that we are a country that continues to be a country of laws. As much as we were tested in the last couple of weeks, we didn't break. We didn't break in those 4 years. And I think in a weird way, we're going to be all the better for this. It may take some time, but we will. So I don't believe we're walking around where 2 out of the 5 people you see walking down the street don't like you because of X, Y, or Z. I just don't believe that. But we have a problem. We have a problem with those 10 to 12% that where the sewer was lifted and they're now out feeling like they have a voice and they are a part of a legitimized situation. So what can we do? A couple things. One is I do think more can be done in really kind of clamping down on some of these social media sites. You saw this with Twitter a little bit. We've been working hard on Facebook to get all kinds of hate imagery down, Holocaust denial, all the types of things that are just encouraging people to kind of do bad things. They're slowly starting to realize they have a responsibility. The one thing I wanted to share with this group is that this notion that it's a violation of someone's First Amendment rights, I call BS on. This is not about the First Amendment. First Amendment has to do with state action and the state basically suppressing your right. This is a private agreement that you make with the Facebooks, the Instagrams, you name it. You basically say, I will agree to your terms to have your site. They can decide what they want, what they don't want. This is not a First Amendment thing. If you hear that, that is just not true. And they can decide what they want. And I believe that they are beginning to take it more seriously. I think this administration will think of ways that they can kind of make them take responsibility and get this crap down. It is a big reason for what we saw January 6th. It was a big reason for what we saw in the last couple of years in terms of hate being unchecked. Two, the media has a responsibility to not ignore or normalize these types of incidents. So as much as you turn on the news and you say, oh my God, another shooting here, and this one went into a Walmart and tried to kill Latinos, or this one walked into a synagogue, or this one walked into a mosque, whatever it may be, these are all awful stories and they take our hearts out, right? But we can't get to the point where the media just says this is just another one of those incidents, because then we're normalizing this behavior and we get into a society that none of us want to be in. So there is a responsibility to magnify and be outraged every time you see somebody do something violent against the other, so to speak. 3, elected officials have to stand up. Just talked about, right? They have to stand up, and there has to be ramifications for those that don't. and we're doing all we can on both. Again, it's not me just railing against one side. There's a lot going on both sides where people need to stand up and say no. And as a result, if you don't, like all of us in this room, we know who you are, right? We have relationships and we'll figure out ways for you to, kind of have a tough time regaining that kind of control. And it's not just elected officials, it's business leaders, it's people that have a real bully pulpit that can actually move the needle by standing up and speaking out. Two, this is three, almost four. Four, interfaith coalitions. There has to be a coming together of Jews and Christians and Muslims, have our faith leaders who should be the pillars of our respective communities come together in ways we haven't seen in a while. That is just got to be a major point of what we should be doing, and it's something we can all do locally. This is a local issue. The more, and I'm working on it big time here at JUF. I think it's important on so many fronts, on fronts having to do with social equity, racial equity. Um, these are our thought leaders and our spiritual leaders that need to be taking these types of stands and bringing people together as opposed to moving us apart. And the last piece, and then I'll throw it out for discussion, is there was a time in this country where if you were a hater, you were an anti-Semite, that was it for you. You didn't get a gig. Mel Gibson didn't work in Hollywood for 15 years after he made those accusations in the back of that squad car when he was drunk. He was done. Persona non grata. They said, we need to get back to the point where it's not okay, that there's going to be ramifications. I'm not talking about cancel culture. I'm talking something much bigger than this. This is about an America that doesn't stand for those principles, and you aren't going to be representing America in certain ways if you have these views and take out these views in certain ways. And I'm beginning to feel like Congress people, business leaders can have this stuff with no ramifications anymore. And that's how you get into real problems. Is that we as a community need to say, this is not okay. And as a result, those people no longer have that forum to espouse those toxic views. So these are all things that we all I think we need to think about. I think these are ways, again, to mitigate and push back against some of these really nefarious things that I just described. This is going to take a village, as our fearless Secretary of State once said. Um, it is. This is not easy stuff. This is tough. We're not going to all of a sudden be able to give jobs to those disaffected people I just talked about. We're not going to be able to shut down social media. This is now our reality. This is life. This is the way we have to do with it. And there's greatness to this, and then there's stuff that I just talked about that's really tough and difficult things. But we can do it, and we can't get down. We need to be positive. We need to kind of make incremental strides to get to a place that we want. But it's going to take a lot of good people like the people on this screen right now to think this through together, not give up and say, the hell with this. This is just a lost cause. Not a lost cause. This is our country. We can make the efforts that we need to get back to a place where we're proud. I think we're starting to see some positive signs. And the last piece is this, and this is what we were just talking about. And I'd love to throw it out to anything you guys want to talk about. But what I'm so troubled by is going back to our elected officials and all the rest. Again, both sides. What is so intoxicating about being a member of Congress to the point where you can't do what is right? Again, both sides. I don't understand it. I work for a congressman. I spent 7 years in Springfield. I saw how the sausage is made. I don't get it. And maybe this is a time for us to really think more about term limits, and instead of having just career
Yes.
politicians where all they think about is, when's my next election? Am I going to get primaried and all the rest? We need real true patriots that care about country and care about people, as opposed to just making sure that they get their next 2 years or 6 years. And that's something that's a much bigger discussion. But I think all of us that have relationships and abilities to kind of move the needle on the political front, I think we need to encourage those to get into politics simply to do the right thing. And if they lose, okay. Like a guy like Kinzinger, and I'll leave it to the group right now, but Kinzinger made a calculated risk that, you know what, if I get primaried, and he probably will, in terms of they're going to throw something at him, I'm sure, because he's got a thing right here in his head. And I think he made a calculated risk. And he also said to himself, you know what? If I lose, I go down with my pride and I can get gigs as a consultant. I can get gigs on
Mhm.
boards. And that's what's been so confounding to me is why there has been a lack of people, be able to say, all right, you know what? I'm going to do what I think is right, what's in the interest of the people that I serve. And if I lose, you know what? Life goes on. And so many of these people are talented people with degrees and lawyers and all the rest. But that's what you have to think about. What is so intoxicating about these gigs that cause people to, once they get there, they may have really big ambitions and think really well about the people they serve. But what is it that makes them
Mhm.
lose that? So anyway, I gave you a lot to think about. I hope this was, something that makes your mind expand a little bit, and I'll open it up to whatever questions or thoughts you may have. So thanks.
Sherry?
Did you hear today that Biden will fire on the spot anyone that he hears demeaning somebody else or acting in a way that
Yeah,
is,
he said it the first day that, the day he got
Yeah.
sworn in. He made
and
that
he said it
clear.
again today.
Yeah, he's really and he just, one of his colleagues, said something that was inappropriate to the press crew a couple days ago, and he was suspended, and actually I think he's taking a leave. So
No,
No,
he
he's
quit
left.
today.
quit.
He's
Okay,
quit.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So he's creating a climate where he's just not going to tolerate inappropriate behavior. And I think that should be applauded. Is that, hey, listen,
It's wonderful.
we're going to run a clean administration that has ethics and standards, and we're going to treat people with respect. And listen, I think this guy has a mandate to bring our country together. That's and you heard it in his speech. It's going to be tough, but
Mhm.
if you take away these 4 years, I think that is his focus. How do I figure out a way to bring us as Americans together in some way to get away from the stuff I just articulated?
I think he's the only person who had the background and experience to be able to do that is,
Yeah.
proven. I made 4
Good question.
notes.
Yeah.
One,
Yeah.
with First Amendment rights.
Uh-huh.
I was always brought up to believe that your freedom ended at my nose.
Mhm.
So incitement and doesn't work for me. You're crossing the boundaries. I have been noticing that news reports are reporting something said and saying this is not factually true. We have the whole situation with the evangelicals. And I'm also finding, I look at my Republican friends and I feel differently about them.
Positively
So,
or negatively?
negatively,
Do you?
I
I just
unless
want to slap them.
these are good people. Some, they're good people on both sides, but
Yeah.
but what all of this is brought out in me is my prejudices and my anger because I feel threatened. And how dare good people, I assumed they were good people, let this happen? What are they doing to right the ship and create a Republican Party that many years ago, except it didn't have the social services safety nets, I could have voted for. It's just mean spirited. It's vile. So there are some of my prejudices.
Well, on another side of what you said, Lonnie, isn't it France that allows 6 weeks of campaigning for office and no outside, I'm getting this wrong. They can't have donations from particular areas of people.
I don't
It would-
know. I don't know, but I know Citizens United in this country, that landmark Supreme Court decision just really
France,
opened the floodgates. But I don't know about
France
France.
is very short. It's like 2 months of campaigning and there's no private funds allowed.
Right. I heard 6 weeks.
Very
Yeah.
tight, very tightly regulated.
But wouldn't that be wonderful here? instead of 2 years of hearing ranting and raving by a madman, which is what we have put up with, and not getting facts straight. And he is the rabble rouser that brought all of this to a head, in my opinion.
But let's talk about the money that could be used elsewhere.
Precisely.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, apparently he spent $50 million. Trump, I mean, this is just one person, but it's much more money than this. Trump spent $50 million just since the election to put out, to have ads of, stop the steal and all that. $50 million.
Not out of
Feed
his
a
own
lot of
pockets.
kids.
Those are all money
Those
that
are
he
all
raised.
donations.
All
Those
donations.
were all donations and things, and that's a whole other time. I'd like to add something to what you were saying about of the hate or the levels. We don't have a draft, and our public schools are increasingly either literally racially segregated or segregated by class and affluence, and often racial as well. We talk about bubbles, which is not a phrase I particularly like, but we have precious few ways of interacting with people who are different from us. And when if you served in the army with, an Italian from Brooklyn and a Jew from Chicago, and you have a different view of other, because you had a buddy, who was different. And what ways can we, at our basic level, leaders can talk and they can say good things, and they can help shift the dynamic, but who you grow up with, who you serve with, who you work with changes your DNA, your heart, your whole attitude for these things. How can that, is that legitimate? And
I think it's legit.
How can that change?
Yeah, I think it's totally legitimate. And it's interesting when two things. One is, I do think, going back to my point about having faith leaders come together, that's an opportunity to bring disparate communities in ways that maybe didn't exist before. But it was fascinating. When I was at ADL, I got to know a few ex-white supremacists, people that were in the movement and got out. And every one of those guys who came out of the movement, all of them, Penelope, had the story of, I never met a Black person before, but I was in a moving company and he was my partner, and I realized after the day, all right, you know what, this guy wants the same thing out of life as I do. Or I work for a Jewish guy who was my boss, and he gave me a tip at the end of the day and said, you did great work, kid. And so there's always those stories of interactions with the other that have been stigmatized your whole life, and all of a sudden you meet them in person and they completely demystify all the crap that you had thought of in your head. And every one of them had that. Everyone. It was a fascinating kind of parallel in terms of, they all had that one or two moments in their life where it's like, I thought that person acted that way and they didn't. So you're absolutely right. It is all about this. And in this city especially, we're so segregated, and the opportunities for, whites and blacks to be together, so few opportunities. And that's why, again, I think if any group of leaders can do it, it's the faith leaders, because if you trust your rabbi, you trust your imam, you trust your priest, you trust your reverend, and if they say, I want you to come to this, that, and the other, you're probably going to say, okay, let's give this a shot.
Sherry, I have a question, or go ahead, Joseph.
Mute.
You're muted, Joseph. Joseph, you're muted.
Soma, no, please.
It's okay, I can wait.
Okay. No, this is a real world question, Lonnie, for you, just to see your opinion.
Yeah.
My partner and I just bought a little cottage on a little fishing lake in Indiana. It's really beautiful. It's Trump country, no question, and we know that it's Indiana. It's picture postcard, perfect agricultural Indiana. It's gorgeous. And everyone's been nice as hell to us. And everybody has to know the two queers from Chicago bought the cottage by the boat launch. There's no way everybody doesn't know that, okay?
Yeah.
So we're thinking, like, And everybody's been nice as hell. Really, really nice as hell. Got a local guy building our house, really great. And we're on kind of a peninsula, okay, a little peninsula. Well, at the end of the peninsula is a chopper, okay, with a Confederate flag on the back of it. Vroom, man. Okay, so he rides around, looks like he's having fun. And there are other pro-Trump people with really gorgeous homes, beautiful gardens, really neighborhood proud people.
Yeah.
I'm not pre-planning any encounter, but
Just in case.
just in case. And here's the thing: I was thinking when the place is finished, we're right next to the conservation club. We'd rent it out for an evening and invite everybody to come have a slideshow of my work or something like that. Invite everybody, just open house kind of thing. I would have every intention of like sticking stuff in people's mailboxes. That's kind of the idea, like our word would travel fast. But how foolish are we? How deluded am I?
Yeah, and this is what I was saying in terms of the good news, Joseph, is that merely because you may have a Trump flag and you may be this, that, and the other, doesn't mean that you're a hater. Okay, it just doesn't. And I think we all that, those of you in this call that may have real, sincere, animus towards, our previous president and all the rest, I hear you, but I think for us to take it out on all 70 million or so that pulled the lever for him, again, is going against what I'm talking about. So I think I think you're right in terms of saying, God, they've been so nice to us. I think you give people the benefit of the doubt until you realize, oh crap, this is a hardcore person that isn't going to change. But there's so many reasons why people voted for this guy, and hate isn't the only one. Okay. And intolerance and prejudice isn't the only one. There's a lot of things that people felt, and maybe rightfully so. Again, going back to like, I don't feel like the people in DC served my interests for the last 30 years of my life, and I'm willing to give someone who's a quote outsider a shot. I'm just saying that could be one thing that has nothing to do with prejudice or this, that, and the other. So I do think of the 70 or 75 million, I think we as Americans have to have more faith that it isn't coming from a place of prejudice and hate of the other and those that
I think we've surprised a lot of people because we're not all that gay. We're kind of disappointing to them. You know what I mean? It was like
I don't know what that means, but okay. Yeah, I hear you.
I think this is what we got. Two gays from Chicago, and we got this.
Right, but Joseph, what
like,
Penelope was saying is that you're the perfect example of how you can totally like destroy stereotypes by you and your partner or husband to be able to like laugh at funny things, have the same things that you want for in life, have similar sensibilities, culture, whatever it may be. Like that's a great opportunity for some people that maybe hadn't been exposed to a gay person before to say, "Oh, I love Joseph. He's like me. We can watch a game together, whatever it may be." Those are ways
they didn't. Most of them haven't, but most of them would say too, as our contractor did, that they're religious and they read the Bible, but they don't judge people.
Great.
And that's a not uncommon opener.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great. It is great, and they mean it. They like.
That's nice. I think we all have to take our own prejudices about what happened last 4 years. We're all battered. We all are. No matter where you are politically, everyone's battered and bruised, and COVID just exacerbated things. I think we all have to take a deep breath, and we have to do all we can to kind of go through life, giving people the benefit of the doubt and trying to figure out ways to bring people together and find commonality. Otherwise, we're going to be miserable for another 4, 8, 12 years.
Trauma.
I had a comment on what Sherry said about the $50 million spent by Trump to talk to the people. I mean, first of all, I don't find any of them to be leaders. I think the idea of leadership is so dampened down. Just because you've been voted doesn't mean you have leadership qualities. But I was more concerned about the ones who vote for him. Just because Trump spent 50 million, you didn't respond to his message. I'm more concerned about the people who respond to the message. And I think the school systems and things like that have a say. We have more and more. Why is it that somebody responds to that message? If someone sold that message to me, I wouldn't respond. I also don't respond to a lot of the messages from the Democratic Party. But the point is, I think in general, our systems, we have, I don't know how to say it, but like when you had said, Lonnie, about the interfaith, And I think faith has a lot to do with it. But I sometimes find the work that Joseph does very nice about interfaith, because when you're talking about the dancing in Buddhism, Buddhism comes in a very subtle way. And so the other day when I learned about the ketubas, I knew very little about the Jewish faith. I learned it because I thought the ketubas were pretty. I inadvertently learned about the faith through art. So if somebody's coming and telling me, learn about an interfaith, but it's not on that topic, because unless I'm open to interfaith, I will not show up at that thing, perhaps. But if it comes to me in a gentle sort of way when I don't expect it, not that I'm against it, I think sometimes those conversations are really right, because I keep seeing numbers that a lot of Americans are not faith-based, probably because they've been disenchanted or sick of religious stuff, because you do see lots of, who is it? Priests who have illegitimate children, even back from the Pope. But I think if those come in gentle forms, you would have a lot, just to your point, people find so much in common. I'm Hindu, I'm supposed to not like Muslims. But when I see beautiful Muslim art, I'm like, screw that, it's so beautiful. I don't care if there are some rabid, long bearded, freaky terrorists. That doesn't mean all of Islam is full of terrorists. I think sometimes things like that, and I guess the point that I was trying to make is, in the schools, the more they teach science, 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 and not an emphasis on the kindness of humanity, empathy, things like that, you're not going to get it through science. You will get more hard-coded, black and white thinking people who will not step out of the box. Isn't that a problem that'll come up as we keep pushing STEM and science and rigor? Because we have tons and tons of data that I'm sure ADL collected it, lots of hatred. That data didn't make people hate less. I think those qualities that one wants to, foster, they don't come from data. They come from something so different. They come from things like faith, things like art, things like beauty, but we don't see it in schools. Because I got shocked by what you said. Diane had taken me. Who is that speaker, Diane, that you took me to hear? Who was from he was from that, remember you took me to the Harris Theater? There was a speaker about the civil rights. What was his name?
Morris Dees.
Morris Dees,
yeah.
Southern
Yes.
Poverty Law Center.
Southern Poverty, right?
Right. So what he had said, the boy who shot all those people in the Charleston church, he was not prejudiced. He had African-American friends. What they did on the internet is target his computer with tons of data showing black people were killing white people. And that 13-year-old boy started believing it. He didn't have the brain power to see this is nonsense. He didn't have that filter. Unless schools allow them to have that kind of rigorous thinking married with empathy, you're going to keep reading more hatred from young people. That's, I think, the worst part. When youth believes this nonsense, when you have rabid, prejudiced children, I don't care which side, that's more frightening to me. To imagine young people who think, oh my God, I hate the LGBTQ or a Muslim or a whatever. We don't target that. I find that much more frightening. An upcoming fear, I feel, that they can't decipher nonsense being paddled to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I hear you, and I think there's a significant reliance on STEM, and there's a lot of reasons why people are very much on that. But if we don't also pay attention to relationship building, empathy, all the things you just mentioned, kindness, how you build value systems, we as a society will go backwards. I will say one thing though, just to kind of push back a little bit. This this latest generation, the millennials, they get a really tough rap for a lot of things, and some of it's warranted. And I have a lot of millennials that work for me, and they can be challenging, especially to manage in terms of work ethic and ability to think that everything they do is amazing and they need constant gratification. Those are by and large they're generalizations that sometimes play themselves out, some don't. But nevertheless, what they are, and this is studies are all showing it, they're amazingly open-minded people. Millennials don't see color by and large. They don't see gay or straight. They're fine with transgender. Joseph just talked about like those things, and even younger, like my kids who are the next, those things don't impact them in any way. They're just like Johnny's Johnny or Joni's now Joni. It doesn't matter to them. That is not how they're deciding if they want to be friends with them. And 30, 40 years ago, it absolutely was. And so, yes, I hear you, but everything and every study and everything that I've seen anecdotally is that this generation and the one even now younger, they are as open-minded could be. On the issue of same-sex marriage, think about where we were 30 years ago and where we're at now. and kind of like the way that civil rights works, that was a meteoric boom. Yes, it was a long time coming, and it was so tragic that a gay couple couldn't be married 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But nevertheless, when it comes to like how things, the arc of civil rights in this country, it takes a long time. This one was like that. And when 80% of millennials, or 85, I think the number was, were in favor of same-sex marriage, that put it over. It was done. And so I hear you, and I think so. Those are the positive signs. But if schools aren't paying attention, especially given the way that data is infiltrating their minds and everything else, we've got to be aware of it, because eventually we're going to pay the cost of not creating. There's a Yiddish word called menschy, like someone that's a mensch, someone that has character and thinks about others and is empathic. If we don't think about how we're creating the next generation of mensches, this country is going to have significant problems.
I guess I was afraid or concerned because who's that boy in one of the Carolinas? He just came into power. He's a military vet. He's in a wheelchair and he came into power. And the first thing he said is like, "You liberals weep now," when he went. Do you know who I'm talking about?
No,
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
I don't.
Is it McConaughey?
Some young guy. He's in his 20s.
Cawthorn, something
Yes, in mid 24s. He's in his mid 20s. I'm assuming you're going to put him up in the Republican Party because, he looks like an Abercrombie Fitch boy.
Oh, he's
a luxury.
gorgeous.
But see, there you go, Barbara. But he's got a vile little mind to
Oh,
spew that
yes.
stuff.
Vile little
He's
mind.
so young. He's half my age. How can you have such abhorrent beliefs? And he's clever enough to market it really well. I mean, those are the kind of things that, and I'm a very positive person, as these people. I have great faith in humanity, but that thing needs to be addressed. I think the arc of history is positive. You idiots won't last too long.
David Madison Cawthorn.
Yeah, him and like
Madison
Adam
Cawthorn.
Kinzinger. I mean, yes, he looks
Cawthorn,
good, but he's like a tallest hobbit. He supported the people in the Texas. I mean, we have such low standard. If you're not some vile swine, you must be good. No, you're still a swine. You're just 80% swine, not 100% swine. Such pathetic. It's us that tolerates this rubbish. Adam Kinzinger is looking good compared to Trump, but he's just as vile. If you really look at how he votes,
Yes.
he's just as abhorrent. Low-level country
95%
passing as
Trump.
intelligence is because we think, oh, look, he's not Trump. They're all bums. No,
So
not
are you saying we just lowered our standards so much that anyone that can rise above that lowest standard, we sometimes.
yes, I mean,
employ?
who's that freak? Sorry, that person from Florida, the other spike-haired monkey. What is his name? This
Gates or
him.
Gates.
I mean, people like that who sit there and show up in Montana and fight against Lynn Cheney, and
Matt
you give him,
Gaetz.
not you, people give him coverage and think, what a great dynamic speaker. No, he can't even get his grammar straight, but yet we sit there and say, oh, what a great leader. There's no standards of leadership. That is not a leader.
Who are we
He's not
talking
a
about?
leader at all. Gates or somebody. You know,
Matt Gaetz. He's a congressman. From
Oh,
Florida.
Gaetz.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who's the other one? Ted Cruz, who's patting him on his back because he knows a quote from Macbeth. I mean, seriously? Because you can spout a line from Macbeth, you're a great leader? No, you're not. I
Josh
mean, we
Hall.
have such pathetic standards of leadership. There are great leaders. These aren't it.
So I guess that's the question we all have. So what's it going to take to get young superstar, the greatest minds of our country to realize that, engaging in public service is a really redeemable, admirable, kind of like vocation.
That's not what I don't think that's what I was shooting for. I was just thinking the main thing is making people care. All we ever do, not we, for the most part, is as if I'm fine, my friends are fine, and I feel empathy for somebody else, but I'm fine. It's this lack of caring that I will only care when I have a direct contact or I know someone who's suffering or small things like that. But because I find something different, I mean, there are people, I think the discussion had started like, everybody's wild. I don't think everybody's wild. I think a lot of people care deeply in the long run. I can only give an example of something like in Bhutan, who really think in a bigger sense when they have something called GNP, greatest national happiness or something, this simple human thing of caring, that's not cool or sexy. Now what is sexy is like, I have $1 billion and I bought a new car or God knows what. You never sit there and think, this thing that you said, bully pulpit, there's no pulpit for like decency. I never see somebody who's talked about just for being decent. And there are so many decent people in the world who quietly do stuff. There is no site saying, look at this decent human being who's just like people, I'm just making this up, Quakers who did things for the companies that they ran. I think Nestle was a Quaker. He took care of his people. Here, Jeff Bezos, this half head shaved man who acts like a dummy, who's just genuflected in front of because he has $1 trillion or God knows what he's got. I mean, what is it that we value? I mean, this mere fact of caring about something, I think that needs to be given more prejudice, more credit, and not to have standards. Oh my God, he's such a great speaker. This is not a PR job. You could be very cunning and speak nicely. We have an example of that. It's called Adolf Hitler. Oh, he's a great speaker. He's a leader. No, he's a cunning snake who sways and drones and then strikes you. What is this? Such pathetic standards.
So Lonnie,
Penelope?
well, Lonnie, you said, what does it take to get people to be leaders? Like the people who have the kind of moral character that Shoma is talking about. For one thing, if there were some way to get rid of anonymity online so that people are not free to issue death threats. Death threats seem to be the current way of saying, I don't agree with you. So
It's big.
no, when Anthony Fauci gets death threats and his wife and his 3 daughters need security, that's wrong.
It's horrible.
Why would I take, if I have first-rate education and a moral compass, why would I take this definitely lower paying job to be a politician and put my family at risk of death threats? And as far as that goes, people outside my door protesting in ways I just
Oh, in
got,
Michigan.
even an idiot can find my name, address, age, telephone number, and email address online in about 5 minutes.
You know what?
Mhm.
And I'm not a public
I
figure.
want to add to that, Penelope. And Lonnie, thank you so much for being here. I've enjoyed this so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
But I wanted to add to something that Penelope was just saying, and then I have a question. Having a family member in Congress myself, while I was watching the proceedings yesterday and feeling very deeply about what happened, I also saw that nobility kind of goes out the window when you're worried for your life. And January 6th could happen to any of those Republicans living in states where those are their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
They could be coming right to their door for them, ready to bring their arsenal with them.
You mean the 7 that crossed over?
Go for them, go for their families, go for their friends. That's very, very real to them. I'm not giving them a pass, but they might have had to be willing to give their lives for that vote. They might have had to. And I wonder how many of us would be willing to do that. I don't know, but that would be the price of their nobility.
And we saw that, to agree with that, we saw that Senator Cassidy got immediately slammed by the Republican committee in Louisiana.
And I do have
That's an
a
excellent
question also.
Yeah.
I have a home out in the countryside in Illinois. And for years, I kind of have spent a lot of time talking to farmers and regular people who struggle. And a few years ago, I traveled across Illinois in the South, and town after thousands of little towns. I didn't go to every one, of course, but the ones that I passed by, horrible poverty, horrible hopelessness, little towns that have dried up and there is nothing. They have nothing, simply nothing. These are all white people.
Mhm.
And the liberal government doesn't really address what they're going through. We're so concerned about the Black community. We're so concerned about the Hispanics that might be coming over the border. We're so concerned about the racial issues, but these are people, and these thousands of little towns across the country that have zero hope, and their kids are hungry, and they're proud. They don't want to be on welfare. They just want jobs. And so our administration comes in and pulls the plug on the pipeline. We have no alternatives for them that they can see right now. I'm just saying.
I'm happy you gave that.
There's another point of view. And you know, we're all sitting here with our security in our nice homes in a city, but you step outside, go to some of these little places just outside Chicago even. You don't have to go far. And it's tough. And they're heartbroken and nobody's paying attention to them. And they are very many of them good people. And Merle, I was doing my favorite thing, which is going into the radio stations. And the other day I was in Alabama someplace, some little place, and there was a beautiful song. And it was something, I'm going to paraphrase it, but the song was something like, "Who is your Jesus? Because my Jesus loves. My Jesus doesn't hate. And my Jesus tries to understand other people and how they think, even if it's not how I think." It was a beautiful song. And I thought, wow, there are people in the South that I consider other than me who are heartbroken by this separation that we're feeling in our country. They're heartbroken by it, not just us.
Lonnie, the reference is to an app called, what is it, Music Garden?
Music Garden.
And you can tune in stations in Botswana and small town America, all over the world, just
It's
by twirling the.
unbelievable.
It's fabulous.
Here's my question. What can we do for these people? How can we let them know that we're thinking? Because I really related to what you said in the beginning, how Trump's his message is what captured the people. And we couldn't understand it, but it was make America great again. I so get that.
Yeah.
So what can we do for them? What now? I mean,
yeah, I understand. I mean, it's, you know, it's obviously it's a multi-layered, you know, kind of response. It's education, it's job opportunities, it's making sure that there's stimulus packages. And unfortunately, it really kind of falls on government at this point in time to really be the engine of all this. Yes, there's can be all kinds of grassroots help and all the rest, but at the end of the day, it's government not forgetting about those people that are in serious need right now. And so it takes, you know, the people that are representing those districts to bring these issues to bear, whether they be in Illinois to explain it to, you know, our delegates in Illinois, or whether it be in DC. And that's exactly, Diane, what I was getting at the beginning, is that, you know, a lot of people, Black, white, whatever you want to say, Americans, are feeling very frustrated, empty, and desperate. And it's a sad thing as we all sit here in, you know, all of our nice homes and all the rest, but there's so many people that don't have. And this country has always unfortunately had that scenario. But for many, this was not something that they anticipated, whether it be on farms, whether it be in a coal plant, whether it be on an assembly line. Like, in their minds, they grew up thinking that, all right, you know what, this is kind of like what we do, you know, like this is what my family has done, and I'm okay with that. And then all of a sudden it's been cut off. And it explains a lot in terms of the resentment and anger and all the rest. And as you said, there's so many that have such pride that want to figure out a way to make it work. And that's what I was going back to with Joseph's point of, simply because you voted for X or Y doesn't define that person. And I think a lot of times we get so worked up that if you're here, that means you're awful. We got to get away from that, in my opinion.
But I was in a restaurant in my little town, and somebody came in. He was a little drunk, and he started spat. He knew I was from Chicago, and to him, and he said this while I was sitting there. To him, Chicago is a place. He was infuriated. And he went into a rage because Chicago people are the ones who are voting to give Blacks welfare money, and he has to pay for them. And what about him? What about him? What about his family?
Isn't he living off
That's
US subsidies?
and he probably doesn't even know any Black people. And I don't know how many times he's even come to Chicago, but these are
maybe
the
never.
stories that they make up in their minds. All they know is that they're hurting and that there's got to be a reason for it.
Right.
And they put it on the liberal people because all they know is they're being taxed, and liberal people care about Black people. So that's how they make up the story around it. And this is just one person's mind doing that.
Merle?
I'm going to share with you a conversation I was in. I'm not representing this opinion, but Diane, it's a different perspective on what you're talking about. And I think some of you know, I don't have a great memory, but this conversation was almost 2 years ago, and I haven't forgotten it. I was with some friends who live in Chicago who have a property in Indiana. And the husband of this couple and I were talking one evening, and he was saying that there's enormous unemployment in the area where their property is. But the people there who are unemployed have no incentive to go back to work because of all of the government subsidies they qualify. And I can't, well, I'm not even going to tell you what my reaction was, but the point is he went on and on and on and on and on about, I mean, obviously he's a Republican, but he had, I mean, it's sort of the other side of what you were talking about in rural Illinois. As a person who is privileged and has business success and so on and so forth, he had absolutely no empathy for people who are unemployed, for towns that have been ravaged by young people deserting them, having lack of economic opportunity. He saw it he twisted 180 degrees the other way and thought in terms of the welfare state, which of course is all a Democratic plot.
But Diane, I have a question. A lot of the people the farmers in the farm country, like Dwight, Illinois, all of them, many of those farms are subsidized, but the corn subsidies, they are technically welfare-like, but I totally agree with your point of view, the lack of opportunities. Aren't there people like Ro Khanna from California who's trying to get jobs into the areas of Iowa, into the farm belt, so that they can get jobs, they can get trained for it? I think the economic issue is so vital to all of this, because happy people don't sit up and protest against something and get angry. At the heart of all this is happiness. Yes.
But there's always a plan to do that. There's always in the future we're going to do that. Yeah. And in the meanwhile, time goes on, and they're waiting and they're waiting. And you know what? When you've got to feed your kids, you don't want to hear about the plans.
Look at when during the 2016 election, there was enormous amount of conversation about infrastructure. And not only do we need to have infrastructure plans, but it would bring enormous employment opportunities to the whole country. Yeah. And whatever happened to that? You know, nothing.
Yeah.
Has anybody actually tried to live on what they give welfare people? The amount of money is so meager, it's beyond belief. I had this conversation Diane, with an extremely wealthy woman from Upper Michigan, who's Michael's going to be feeding me the information because my memory is like Merle's. So
I know her better.
and so she's extremely wealthy. I mean, many millions of dollars,
Many generations.
and many generations of
Yeah.
money.
Old
And
money.
she was carrying on
Old,
about.
old.
We were at dinner with her daughter and son-in-law, who are from Chicago and think like Chicagoans. They've been poisoned. And anyway, they
No, Heathens from Stager.
well, I bet they live here. And
Yeah.
anyway, they were talking about, she was talking about welfare cheats. And this was actually in 2017, after the crash, where, you know, and I said to her, you know, how much, and she was outraged. And I'm thinking, okay, how much money do you think is cheated out of the system? By people who,
queen.
by the welfare
The welfare
queen
queen.
types, you know, people
Yeah.
who are undeserving, or as the English in the 16th century would call sturdy beggars. How many sturdy beggars are there?
Never heard that.
And I said, how much money do you think that is? Maybe $2 or $3 billion a year? I don't know the number, but let's assume that that's what we're talking about, 2 or 3 billion. I said, do you know how much money disappeared during the crash into the where people were? I said, trillions of dollars were burnt up in a furnace like they never existed, and multi-millions of people were thrown out of work and ruined by this. And I said, and these are white collar criminals who I suspect many are Republicans. And I said, let's see, 2 or 3 billion multi-trillions, 2 or 3 billion multi-trillions. How does that equal out to you? What do you think about that? What kind of answer did I get? Silence. Do you think I actually changed her mind about anything? I don't think so. But they never think, and they don't think in that regard. Now, the farmers, as Shoma pointed out, are on welfare through subsidies, but they're also working their asses off.
Yes,
And they are working like dogs trying to keep the farm from failing. And yes, they're getting money. They don't look at themselves the same way as the people who in the urban areas who are getting welfare payments. By the way, they don't know who these people are, and they have no idea under what conditions they live, and they have no idea of how hard they're trying to find work or are working at subsistence money. And our medical system in this country doesn't allow poor people to be able to afford to buy medical care, even under the Affordable Care Act, because those premiums are not cheap. And if the levels of qualification for subsidies are so high, they can't make enough money to live on and pay insurance and buy and live in an apartment or anything else in an urban area. It's a scandal. And so, but they don't understand that. They don't know these people. They don't know their situations. And they don't equate themselves with the urban poor.
Penelope?
One of the sort of the bedrock images of the United States of America is the land of opportunity. And, you know, people have come here from places where there was no hope for advancement because they were peasants or they were Jews or they were someone who in the environment they were in had no possibility of advancement. And in this country, everything was possible. And I remember reading years ago about an extremely successful Vietnamese immigrant who said, you know, people back in Vietnam think the streets are paved in gold in America. And he said, that's not true. But if you work really, really hard, you can do well. I mean, he talked about, you know, 16, 18-hour days that he did to make this business over years, and he did. But it seems to me that it's less possible to do that. Maybe immigrants, even today, whether it's by contrast with where they're coming from or what they come with, I don't know, see possibilities in this country that did not exist where they were. But native born Americans of all races who don't have the opportunity to go to Harvard and or go to get a job in a particular high paying, in investment banking, something like that. I don't think they see that they can do well, that they can move up. You'll tolerate a lot of stuff for the opportunity to move up or for the opportunity to have your children have a better life. And somehow that seems, and I don't know, perhaps this is my perception and it's not true, but it just seems as though there are fewer opportunities to grow up in one of the towns Diane's speaking of, and I've been to them as a Rhodes Scholar, and for the Illinois Humanities Council, and it's a completely different world. I learned very quickly to make no political references and actually to simply not mention I was from Chicago. I mean, they knew that, but I didn't mention it. And I've been in towns where they're clearly failing. It seems that, but it isn't just those. I mean, people who grow up, within spitting distance of where I am now, I think have the same feeling that there's no hope for them to do well, and that makes you have nothing to lose. Why would you do all the things we're talking about if you're not going to be able to do well? And I'm not talking about welfare. I'm talking about an opportunity to do well. Is that, have I distorted the view, or is this true? Do you think?
Well, I have a question about that, and I really hear you, and I agree with you on this. And Lonnie, I want to ask you again about this, but the immigrants are the lucky ones because they come here with a lot of energy and a lot of wanting to do, and a lot of wanting to learn and move forward and make their lives better. These people that we're talking about in these little towns, these are mostly people whose ancestors came here long ago. They were the immigrants, maybe 100 years ago, maybe 200 years, maybe more. And that impetus is all gone. And they don't know how to make things work right now. And they're very suspicious of you coming to tell them anything. So they homeschool their children. They make sure they really police where they're getting their information because they don't want you telling them anything.
Except cookbooks. They like to hear about cookbooks.
Yeah, well, maybe.
That's what I talk about, Lonnie. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see that.
I'm teasing, sorry.
So here's my question. There, every now and then, someone will come up with an idea or a program for the trade for the welfare money. So there's a program that you could go back to school if you want, and they pay for that, and then the government pays for that, and then there are jobs provided, and you work to get paid rather than just getting free money through welfare. I know Clinton had a program like that, and these programs never go anywhere. And I'm wondering why they don't. Why we want to just diminish these people, have them live with no pride whatsoever, getting a welfare check. It seems to me like if they had to get educated for a new kind of a job in order to get the money. They aren't going to get the money unless they go through a job training program. Then maybe they might do it. Maybe they might do it.
This is one of those that's outside of my purview. I honestly, I throw it back to the group. This is not an area of expertise of mine. I'm not somebody that knows that much about the whole welfare system and motivations and all the rest. So I'll throw it back to anyone else that has a better answer than me.
But here's the thing: if this administration can come up with something like this really quickly, we might have a chance to rope in some of those people that we lost to the Republican Party. We might be able to get those back if they saw that we could provide them a way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that are hurting are looking for government to lead, looking for government to actually help them in their journey in their life. And I think
even though the votes are against government interference, it is so paradoxical and so complicated. And many years ago, when I was doing site visits with the Chicago Foundation for Women, there was some program, and this obviously made no impression, and I took nothing away from it, where we were visiting sites that helped people find jobs. And it was so amorphous. Yes, the computers were there. And yes, they were trying to do job training. But what I was picking up is that people are so demoralized and feeling so helpless. You know, when you're depressed, you find it very difficult to be in action and to be working on your own behalf. So, yeah, this is complicated. And I'm not sure there are any solutions. We got out of the Great Depression because of World War II, not because of Roosevelt. He had marvelous plans. We have great public murals because of the work projects, whatever. How did the country go back to work? Because there was a war and we had to rearm.
Diane, did you mean to what Barbara was saying? The war made jobs, they made money so people could make a living. So from that point of view, I think, Diane, is that what you're saying is what I'm hearing is dignity, that they don't want welfare, but they'll work for it. So perhaps it's not this government. If the big companies, if they had like an internship program, you learn on the job and you get paid. It gives them a dignity to earn a living. So it's not a hangout begging.
Exactly.
I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And I think if the deal is there's a certain amount of time that you have to get training, and we'll give you this amount of time, and then your checks are going to stop coming.
Yes.
So you're going to need a job by then. So you're not just pulling the rug out from under them, but I don't know. I never could understand why. I mean, it would be so much better for the country and for our economy to spend the money on this job training and maybe open ourselves up to the infrastructure rebuilding, which we need anyway, and give these people jobs.
Diane,
we'd save money in the long run.
Again, from doing site visits with the Chicago Foundation for Women and with two other board members, I went to a job training site, and the charismatic leader of the organization was decrying that big business does nothing for her population. And I looked at my group and I said, do you mind if I step outside my role as board member And they said, go ahead. And I looked at her. I said, I have a company less than a mile from here. We're looking for good people. And here's the name of my HR man. Couple of requirements. People need to be able to read and they need to show up on time. We have jobs. And I told Jim about it, expect a call. Mm-mm.
Yeah, but there's no impetus. If they were getting checks that they knew were going to not be there if they didn't show up, then there would be impetus. But if they could just go on the way they're going on,
Go ahead.
if they're just going to,
Tommy Thompson used to be the governor of Wisconsin. And he was Republican, but I think in his own way, he was a humanist. I mean, they're not paradoxical. The terms aren't. I mean, I think you can have Republicans who have somewhat humanistic values. And he tried, there was a stream of people coming from Illinois to Racine and Kenosha and Milwaukee that were on welfare. And he tried to figure out a way. He had two goals. One goal was to actually improve the welfare system, but the other was a very practical, concrete, material goal of stemming the flow of people into the state on welfare recipients. So he did this. He tried to, first of all, you had to establish residency, which in Wisconsin is not terribly difficult. But then you had to make a commitment to a training program. And when you received your welfare, you had to produce documentation that you were looking for or actually attending one of these training programs. And for a while, it looked like it was working. But this is the bogus part of this, Diane. You have to have a strong economy to absorb the jobs. And you cannot build a program like this on promises from industry. What you do is you have to have a culture that believes in the value of the system because it's a statewide system. And so ultimately, it didn't work. The only effect was it did cut the flow of welfare recipients from Illinois into Wisconsin. So I think the idea, theoretically, of course, is very good. But I think in actual practice, there are too many other variables over which we have no control. But I can't say we are talking about these things in such global terms. It's really hard for me to respond to anyone in particular. I just want to put a couple of thoughts out here, but we have to go in a couple of minutes. We talk about education and what we can do and why people vote against their own self-interest. All the time we see this. Some of the people you're talking about voted for Trump in Wisconsin, and they lose their income because China stops buying our soybeans because Trump, imposes his tariffs. They don't see how it affects them personally.
Cause and effect.
To me, this is a lack of critical thinking. To me, this is a product of critical thinking, is a product of good educational system. And I just want to introduce you, I mean, if you haven't read Horace Mann, to go back and to read and to get some theoretical orientation. I'm not assuming you don't have it, but the public education is an extremely important value that does cost a society money. We do have to invest in it. It is our most precious investment. It has not been happening. Bush's No Child Left Behind was funded at less than 10% of what it was meant to be. You had people in schools competing for scarce scholarship money to help, programs that were minuscule in terms of their impact on the larger economy. We really have to have it as a value, as a social value. We have to value civic service. We have to know how our government works and how our behavior impacts other people. These are basic fundamentals. Now, do you know that the last time I heard of a civics class being taught in a public school was 20 years ago, and that was in 8th grade? There may be exceptions, but in general, we have been moving away ever since the 1980s. We've been moving away from a type of social compact that says it is okay to provide, it is okay to take some of our wealth and put it into education and to help people improve themselves, to give a scholarship, to give people who have a disadvantage a slight advantage of getting into graduate school. I mean, all of these other, it's been being whittled away and whittled away and whittled away until we are where we are now. So I think we need to reintroduce, in my opinion, Horace Mann. That's one thing. And now the other thought I'm going to leave, and I'm sure you can talk about it forever as I could. I find this very interesting. That's why I'm part of your group. Biden is trying to do something similar to what you are talking about. I believe that the theoretical is one level we have to approach this problem through. We have to have guidance. We have to have values, core values that guide us in our direction so that we don't waste time or energy on things that aren't going to ultimately get us to where we want to be as a society. And I think what Biden is, but we always have the material, the physical. We cannot ignore the fact that people have to have food, clothing, computers. They want to have, they want to go to maybe J. Crew instead of Penny's. I don't know. They always have this idea of betterment, and it's going to vary depending on the person's worldview. And so I think what Biden is trying to do with his plan is really a rescue plan. I think it is trying to give the people that you're talking about that are so cynical, that are so angry for having been left out or having been hurt, regardless of the cause. He's trying to give them something to keep them, to help them survive. At the same time, I think you'll see this coming in the next couple of weeks, he's trying to do the infrastructure bill, which is going to be able to give them actual jobs and something concrete that will help and go towards building a social structure and an economic structure that we need to improve our well-being. And then along with that, the third part of this will be an education bill that hopefully will pay for public education to the degree that we need it, because I think that is the most important investment, and I think that it's been the most neglected, and I think is part of the solution that we need to get to a common core of values.
Let me tell you something though. They have their own set of values, this group that I'm talking about. And the group that I'm talking about is the group that is the problematic group from January 6th. This is what I'm talking about.
I think
they homeschool their kids. They are fearful. They do not hear, they will not be going to your public schools with your values. They will make sure of that. And we hear what Biden is doing and what is saying, and believe in him, and that he is going to do those things for these people. But if you flip over to Fox News, you can hear what they're not hearing. It doesn't compute. somehow Trump had a way of speaking directly to them. And even though I think Biden's message is much more for them, they don't hear it
They
from
don't see
Biden.
it.
And you can go to Fox News and just check that.
I think
Go
this,
back and forth between the two, and you can hear what they're missing.
I think you can do that. I would like to have sometime a coffee with you. It's very difficult because what you're talking about is very complicated. And I think it involves many different, you can look at this, a meta model, or you can look at, there's so many different ways you can look at it.
I know.
It's hard to really deal with in a setting like this. Let me just say this, that when you can control the source of input, it's going to be harder to change anybody's mind. But if you give that person something that goes out of that system and is larger than him or herself, you will affect that person's thinking, and it can be almost unwittingly. In other words, if the person is reading or hearing how bad everything is, and all of a sudden becomes a recipient of a job that is a part of a welfare program that he all of a sudden becomes a little more sensitive to the source of the job and not where he's getting. But you see, these are so, it's like a symphony. All these different parts have to be put together.
Yeah.
But what I feel so bad for you is that you feel so strongly about the negative aspects, when I think there are a lot of things going on that are really being put into place right now to help build a future that's going to take several years to build, because this has been going on. This has been going on since 1980, since Reagan, when he started deregulating. This is when this whole thing, the safety net, was dismantled, and capitalism became the ugly head that we
Lonnie,
hear about.
Lonnie, JUF covers 200 plus organizations.
Yeah.
Everything from Yeshiva to the Ark. You've been there 2 years now.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? And I'm not even sure how to ask this question, but what the balances are. What was going on during the last 4 years? What were the needs? Now we have Biden and promises hopefully fulfilled. What do you see the shifts coming into effect?
Yeah, it's hard to gauge right now. I can tell you from the COVID perspective, Barbara, that
Okay.
we saw an immense uptick starting literally end of March last year in terms of people that were decimated by this pandemic, in terms of jobs lost, family members that were sick, having insufficient insurance, to the point where the safety net models were about ready to just implode. And so we had to really kind of send significant dollars to keep them propped up because the needs were so immense. Just regular food, cash assistance type of sustenance types of needs that were just rampant, not just in the Jewish community, but in the larger community as well. And as a result, we did bolster all the things that are a part of the JUF network. And it hasn't really subsided at all. And so even though there are numbers that indicate better, et cetera, we're still, in an immense crisis right now of people that are hurting. And this is just in our city, separate from what Diane's talking about, people that are living in totally different areas, rural, farming, and all the rest, just people that are in Chicago proper that are having a tough time keeping a roof over their head and feeding their children. It's a real issue. And, I had a meeting with the mayor 2 weeks ago. We talked about it. She's aware, the governor's aware. There's hurting out there. And so, we'll see if, in fact, the president of the United States has any impact on those people that are affected in terms of programs and subsidies and insurance and all the rest. We'll see. I sure hope so. I hope that our response from a national perspective is a little bit more organized and operational than what we saw before. But I don't think it's as easy as necessarily just a change in administration that's going to change the trajectory of certain groups that are really in a tough spot. It takes a lot of different levers to get this thing back on track, and going back from education to, job investments, to issues that we're having in certain pockets of our city. This is a tough situation for a lot of people right now, and I'm worried, Barbara, that the chasm between the have and the have-nots continues to increase at ways that we haven't seen in a while. And that concerns me too, because then it's an obliteration of the middle class, which is really problematic.
Sherry,
I had a question.
go ahead, Soma.
No.
No, go ahead, because I'm going to refer to something you said before.
I have a
Go ahead.
question about JUF. You're with JUF now, right, Lonnie?
Yeah, I'm the president of JUF.
Right. So you have data that you access. So this, in the situation of anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
I'm sure you can see where it comes from. Which areas do they come from? Are they coming from the rural areas, or are they coming from places in the city? Are they coming from affluent areas? Because you can have prejudice irrespective. Anywhere.
Yeah,
Have you tracked where is this coming from?
Yeah, so interestingly, it does come from everywhere. So there isn't one place in particular. When we used to do studies of anti-Semitism in this country, and we studied anti-Semitic attitudes, there was not a huge disparity of anti-Semitism from the city or suburbs. What was interesting, which shouldn't be a surprise for many of you, there's a significant difference between those who are educated in anti-Semitic attitudes and those that aren't. That is one area that definitely there's a chasm between. It's not age, it's not even socioeconomic as much. It's education levels. So the lower education levels, the higher rates of anti-Semitism versus higher rates of education levels. So going back to what we talked about earlier in terms of how important education is in so many ways of creating people with character and people that have value systems and have empathy and kindness and all the things we were talking about earlier, that's usually an indicator of somebody's attitudes towards the quote other. So that's what we've seen anecdotally in terms of stuff that's out there. So it can come from, and we see white supremacist movements getting people from all over. And now the ability to recruit people from all over the state or all over the country is so easy. I mean, you saw the people that descended both in Charlottesville and in DC. You're getting people from all over, rural, city, north, south, west, middle of the country. It's no longer like pockets of just like Indiana where the KKK was, 60 years ago. Now it's everywhere. And again, having computers and having the ability to, share this invective and recruit people so easily, as opposed to going to someone's, putting something on someone's car and say, come to this meeting in the local YMCA. It's much easier now. And so you're getting people from all over.
I took a few notes. During Clinton's time, didn't we have a moratorium on welfare?
Well, there was a huge welfare reform bill that he passed, sure.
And wasn't it 9 months on welfare, and then you had to prove that you were either looking for a job or you had to have gotten a job? There was an end point to it, which I think once there's an end point, unless you're hungry, the end point is a stimulus. At least it would be for me. Wilkerson wrote a book called Caste. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. And it's very interesting, and it talks about how the have-nots need to feel that there's someone who has less to make themselves feel more important. And that bothers me a lot because, there has to be a limit. But education for me, it seems to be the line where we're no longer saying, okay, after 9/11, everybody has to hate the Muslims and we have a war against the Muslims. But we never had a war against the Muslims. We had a war against the Taliban. And unless you have enough education, you're never going to see that distinction. And that bothers me tremendously. Education seems to do it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's the song from South Pacific?
You have to be carefully taught.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they're rioting in Africa.
Africa, they're starving and
But not
staying.
here. But not here. Mhm. Frightening.
Lonnie,
Yeah.
highlight, because we can go through all of this and become very, I don't even know the word anymore, not deadened, but frustrated.
Yeah.
Because all of us need to feel positive in what we're doing.
Right.
How do we do that? What can we be doing?
Honestly, I think it's getting involved in organizations that bring you joy. There's so many, what I've learned in my 2 years at JUF, which has been a gift, the different little organizations that are just bringing joy to other people, creating a garden in someone's home that can't do it, food assistance. And especially coming out of COVID, where we've been, so, you know, caved in and not being with other people, and so we're all, I think, needing some humanity and needing connection. And I think the way to amplify that is to do things, acts of kindness to help others will just bring so much to each other's souls that make you feel better. And not just doing it because it makes you feel better, but you know the impact it's having on others at a time when we've all discussed for the last 2 hours how many people are in need. To me, that's a huge thing. I think we all need to focus on it. And I still have kids in the house, so a huge part of what my wife and I are talking about after we get out of this is, all right, what are we going to do as a family to give back? And I just think that's just going to nourish all of us. So acts of kindness, and there's so many places that are doing it, and it's not hard to find. And just continue to kind of do that, and as a result, I think we're going to start to find connections in ways that we haven't before.
You're making me think also, we see such overwhelming problems and such things. I mean, some of the things that Diane is talking about, but all of this is, it's overwhelming. And, I in some ways one could envy Bill Gates, who, with the addition, I'd forgotten that Warren Buffett gave him most of his fortune as well.
Right.
To do this, he can make a difference at a global level in
Yeah.
terms of
And
change.
is.
And
What
is.
are the,
And is.
and what are the others doing?
And bravo, I mean, and so I can't do that, actually. My income
Yeah.
does not
Right,
permit
right.
me to do that. So I can think, you can feel helpless, or and I'm thinking, I'm remembering it, Diane, as you were talking about these towns, I'm remembering the experience of going to towns that often didn't break 1,000 in population as a Rhodes Scholar for the Humanities Council. As Lonnie, I talked about cookbooks, but basically they were a vehicle to talk about American culture and history. So, what is American food, which gets to immigration and
Sure,
gets, I mean, that is a way of, and I'm thinking, when we're talking about education, yes, people don't know civics. They don't know things like what the First Amendment is,
Yep.
what it really covers. If you're in my house, I can tell you not to say anything I want. And that the First Amendment does not give you the right to say anything, nor does it in Costco or, anywhere that's, it's only to do with the government. People
Right.
don't know that, and they need to know that kind of thing. But doing this kind of education, I don't see working in as well. And I hear, I meet the same people you're talking about, Diane. But maybe figuring out, I mean, the Rhodes Scholar program is one way of doing it. And talking about cookbooks, everybody likes food. Everybody likes food, and everybody has an opinion on it and has a story to tell. So it is a way to get people to talk about, pizza's American. Did you know that? I mean, it's an American food, not pre-1930s, it's a way of getting people to think about things. But if, how can we have conversations? And maybe there's, Lonnie, maybe there's some kind of, aside from the Rhodes Scholar Program, which I recommend, maybe there's some kind of vehicle for this. I mean, God knows this group is articulate. There's some kind of vehicle for doing this kind of informal conversation, because I think that's how minds get changed.
Yeah, I agree.
They don't get changed with this.
Right.
And they don't necessarily get changed with this from the leaders. I think they get changed from individual conversations, but well, COVID, I don't see anybody outside my living room except through this. But even in the before times, I love that phrase. What are we going to call it afterwards? I mean, the after times, I mean, the apocalypse comes to mind, but even in real life, I don't see that unless I go out with the Rhodes Scholar Program or I was thinking I volunteer at Newbury Library's book fair, but we still get a very particular group
It's
there.
still an echelon.
Yeah, but it's hard to meet people. I mean, I had a great conversation with a guy who came to repair my refrigerator this week. No kidding.
A person.
A person.
Yeah, and that you have to leave. You have to go to the next job. And he kept talking. And we were talking about impeachment and politics and things. And he clearly, we don't come from the same place in terms of how we think. And we left, I would say I'm quite confident he would say, as I do, with a very positive feeling about the interaction. How do we have those conversations?
It's a great question. It's funny you said that, Penelope, because I just had my senior team meeting on Thursday. And one of the things we're working on is we're figuring out, all right, what are our strategic priorities at JUF for 21? And there's some biggies that we're tackling: mental health, obviously sustenance, making sure people have what they need to continue with a roof over their head, food on the table. We talked a little bit about engagement, and then we talked about how maybe JUF can be seen as a convener for the Jewish community, at least in a time when we're so polarized. Even our own community is polarized about. Can JUF play the role, given our expanse, of convener, where we can bring people together to talk about tough issues? We talked about a lot of things today, and there's, people have different sets of opinions. Like, what can we do in a safe place to really kind of talk about issues and agree to disagree without being disagreeable? And how do we bring the civil discourse to a level that's more manageable? And it's definitely a focal point of mine. When I have the answer, I'll give it to you. But there are organizations that are popping up out there that are focused on this and that come into organizations and start facilitating and doing these things. It's super important. It's super important for our community, the Jewish community, because I worry that we're going to start fragmenting and splintering off. And the same people that I told you about that want bad things to happen to Jews and Blacks and other want nothing more than to see those communities splintered. They love that. They want to see us kind of having our own fissures and issues and all the rest. So it's incumbent upon me as kind of leading this community to kind of figure out ways to bring us together and kind of be rowing from the same side of the ship, so to speak. So,
one of the things that has often, one of the running jokes within the Jewish community is that the only thing that two Jews can agree on is what the third should give to charity.
Right.
Which I've always loved.
That's funny.
And the frustration of what do I do? And I think I've distributed this to the group, but it has gotten me through now. And it's from the Talmud. And it is, do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And God, there have been times that I just don't talk to me. I can't do anything. The frustration of being, useless or impotent or,
Mhm.
you know, somehow we all have to be made to feel of value in that what we're doing counts. And it's different for every one of us. What has deep meaning? What resonates? Because, you know, one of the things, and you and I've talked about this, that I find so frustrating is that you'll give to an organization, and the next thing you know, you're asked for more, you know. And it's like, wait a minute, guys, make me feel good about that contribution. I gave it because it made me feel good. And what goes on in a period that we're in, whether it was political or whether it is philanthropic, the number of solicitations that come in by the hundreds, for some people by the thousands, it's like, I can't meet everybody's needs. So how do I focus and feel valuable and that I'm contributing? I mean, the political, I got a phone call once from a guy, Democratic, Barbara, thank you so much for what you've done. And I think it was the Democratic Congressional Committee. And he sounded terrific. Unfortunately, the next sentence was, would you consider another contribution?
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? You started off right and you sound great. But why don't you divide these two phone calls? Because you've just negated the first one and made me feel like I'm not doing enough. And he said, you're absolutely right.
It's a good lesson for professionals like me that are in the nonprofit world, which I kind of knew before, but to hear it again is really important because
You do it right. You've always
Thank
been able to be in discussion with me.
yeah, sure. But it's about relationships. Going back to like what we can take away from this conversation, isn't it? I mean, everything in our life is about relationships. And me being able to be introduced to all of you, it's building relationships. And especially at a time like this where there's so many vexing problems, to have relationships and have people that you lean on, not for any ulterior motives, but to just either, get intellectually stimulated or to learn something.
Or to
Relationships are
vent.
or to vent. Relationships are where it's at. No, it really is.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
appreciate the
Penelope and I talked to each other the other day because I had a bad case of the grumps.
Yeah.
And she and I started venting. And 3 hours later, we got off the phone we were like ricocheting one idea to another idea. I don't like talking on the phone, as most of my friends know.
Yeah.
It was such a joy, just pinball machine,
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah.
But it was connection.
Yeah, I'd like to share with you a term for that kind of relationship thing that you're talking about, straight from Nepal. It's one of my classmates has spent a lot of time in Nepal, starting with the Peace Corps right after college, and now she is actually the head mistress of a school in Kathmandu, although she's in Long Island in COVID time. But she's about to go. She wants to go back to Nepal soon now. And getting a visa was absolute. I mean, just no, you can't get a visa, impossible. So she started making phone calls. And yet last week she went into the city and came out with a visa, quickly, no problem. The Nepal term is source force. So you have this, you go to sources, you go to your connections, and they go to their connections, and they go to their connections and that's how things get done. And it happens around the world. It's I decided to adopt SourceForce. It's time to bring in
That's
SourceForce.
nice.
No, yeah.
I like it.
So Lonnie, I'm gonna have to go, but I just wanted to say one thing about, and I'm gonna go back, everybody's sick of me saying this, but I'm just so, my brain is so hooked on this app we're talking about, the radio station. And
Yeah.
you were talking before about how, you were talking before about
I'm looking it up right now. Yeah.
how all of these groups are kind of connected through the internet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's that massive connection that we're talking about.
Yes. But sometimes in a negative way.
No,
Right.
I did you go to the Holocaust luncheon this past year?
I go to a lot of those, but I probably was there. Sure.
Yeah, well, there was a wonderful young man.
The hologram.
There was a wonderful young man that was talking about, he was a white supremacist,
Mhm.
and he was at college, and do you remember this story?
No. Mm-mm.
No?
I probably know the guy because I knew all these characters. But yeah, tell the story.
Well, he was on, I think, a website for his school, and
Yeah.
there was a dialogue going on, and he was the odd man out, and he spoke up, and because he'd been so indoctrinated from his family and where he came from and his beliefs, he started spouting off some of his beliefs, and everybody was kind of ganging up on him. But there was one person who just kind of opened a door to try to listen to him and speak to him. And is this ringing a bell? And
No.
eventually there was a relationship, and pretty soon he got invited by this person who he had some simpatico with,
Yeah.
to come to a Friday night. And it happened to be at the word's going out of my head, the Jewish kids.
Hillel.
Yeah, it happened to be at a Hillel.
Yeah.
And he's suddenly in a Hillel. And the girl who he was speaking to said to all of the group, just leave him alone, just let him have a good time. Anyway, they eventually wound up getting married, but sort of one person at a time. And
Yeah.
it's talking about just opening and letting people come to know you. But my thinking, and if you go to that site, there's a globe, and there's all these lit up green places that are living places that are alive in real time, and they're communicating through music, through interviews, right now. And those ideas are going on all over the world in real time right now. So I'm just thinking, if JUF had a radio station,
Mhm.
they could be sharing with the world themselves, their
Right.
views,
Right.
what they
Right.
believe in. That's just one thing. Radio station, maybe it's through the internet, but
Yeah.
maybe there could be some kind of living thing that's happening all the time that people could tune into, where they could get to know Jewish people
Mhm. Mhm.
and really start to have a relationship with them.
Right. Right. Because it does break down all kinds of misconceptions.
And
and
I
prejudices
really
there.
think
I
that
agree.
that's the bottom line.
I agree.
And it sort of
Hmm.
is more potent when it's affinity groups. I'm a stamp collector. Oh, I've got a
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
that it's neutral ground.
Neutral ground, yeah. Mhm.
Good point.
I mean, that is Steve's previous comment on cookbooks.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That
Bringing
gets
together.
people into a place. Lonnie, you said that you were talking about this with your group about
Yeah.
how you would.
Yeah.
I would really, if you pursue this, I would
Yeah.
really love to know, because right now the only organization I know about is the Illinois Humanities Council, which does marvelous things
Yeah.
in terms of, the people who attend these. They tend in great numbers, because in those towns, Diane, that you're talking about, in the olden days, the 50s, diversity was defined as having both a Lutheran and a Methodist church.
Yeah.
the same time.
A Baptist or a Methodist too.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But
Yeah.
right now, when I went to those towns, I would see evangelical church after evangelical church in a a Quonset hut kind of thing in the middle of a cornfield. So those towns are splintered. And one of the only places they can meet within the town on neutral territory are the two places that the Illinois Humanities Council tends to have its programs free and open to the public, the library and the historical society of the town. And so people would come. By the way, you don't give a program on Wednesday night because everybody goes to church on Wednesday night, just FYI.
Right,
But
right.
any other time, they are splintered too. Even within those towns, it isn't that you meet everybody at church on Sunday as you did years ago, or at least you met the Methodists or the Lutherans, but so these splinters, the splintering is happening at all levels.
Yeah.
And it is not, it's not helping us think across boundaries as Americans. And so anything that you can think of, and I think anti-Semitism gets folded into this, gets covered, because as soon as you open to other, you open to, I think you open to many others, not just
sure.
the other you connected to.
I always say anti-Semitism usually like the bellwether of the rest. It's kind of the canary in the coal mine, that if you have anti-Semitic views, you're probably going to have probably going to be Islamophobic and homophobic and all the rest. It usually does fall that way. But yeah, no, we're actually looking at a group called, this is more in the Jewish community, called Resetting the Table, Penelope. You can look it up online, but they're a group that's really focusing on this. And at least from an internal standpoint, we're going to at least see how our staff responds to that. But maybe there's applicability throughout the community too. But there's a lot of organizations thinking about this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming today.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm gonna have to
Great
jump off.
discussion.
This was a great discussion. I enjoyed meeting all of you. And Barbara, thank you for inviting me. And this is a great way to spend a Sunday. There was no football that I missed. It was perfect.
Exactly. And we have kept each other sane
Oh, I
and
love that.
connected.
Connected. Yes. Relationship building, connection.
Trauma.
Absolutely.
This is great. I just wanted to show something to Lonnie, but could you stop recording because it's the child in the video. I want to make sure it's not.
Okay.
Whoever has to, I know Diane, you might have to go, so I don't want to keep you, but I wanted to show you this. It's lovely to see you, Diane.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thanks.
This has got something to do
Thank
with
you, Lonnie.
Bye. My
Bye,
pleasure.
Diane.
Great to meet you.
It's got something to do with anti-Semitism. I just wanted
I'm
you
trying to figure out how to there.